This episode is brought to you by Fortis et Fidelis, honoring the brave and faithful service of our fallen. The free will never forget. What's going on, everyone? Hope you're enjoying the podcast. Just want to take this time to say thank you to all our supporters, all our listeners for voting for our podcast, as we were awarded the Best Educational Podcast on the first annual Military Veteran Podcast Awards. Again, thank you all for supporting the podcast and our brand Fortis et Fidelis, and helping us create memorial coins for families of the fallen. Thank you all for the vote, and we hope for your continued support. Are you interested in creating your own podcast? If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First, it's free. Secondly, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So what are you waiting for? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Everyone, welcome to another episode of the Brave and Faithful Podcast. I'm your host, Raiden Dionisio, and today I have a military spouse, a Marine spouse. She's also a published author and content editor for PCS Grades. And the most important thing, she's a mother of five. A mother of five, guys. Lizann Lightfoot. How you doing, Lizann?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on today. It's certainly an honor to be here.
Well, I appreciate you for taking the time, especially, like I mentioned, 5 kids. Wow. Congratulations. Congratulations to you and your husband there.
Thanks. It's definitely been an adventure and part of our journey. I did have to hide in my car for a little bit, so usually it's a bit noisy in the house.
Well, I don't want to take too much of your time with the kids here, but, let's get right into it. How long have you been a military spouse, and can you just explain to us how that journey is for you and your family?
Sure thing. I've actually been with my husband for 21 years now. We met before he had even considered boot camp. So
Okay.
I've been with him through the whole journey. He ended up enlisting about a year into our relationship, and he just hit his 20-year mark this week. So he's been a Marine for 20 years. Thank you. We have officially been married for 14 of those years. We ended up dating a ridiculously long time in the beginning, mostly because of some deployments and some undesirable duty stations. So that's part of my story.
Wow, that's 20 years, right? We talk a lot about the sacrifices that the military member makes for that, but also, they have the spouses, right? The dependents that also make that sacrifice. How has that journey been for you? With the deployments, training. I'm sure he's been away more times than we can all imagine, right? How difficult were those trying times?
There has been many ups and downs for sure. So he did his first, was it 3 deployments before we were married? And then the other 4 deployments have been during marriage and with kids. And
wow.
Definitely have had some challenges with those. I talk in the book about how our 3rd baby was born during a deployment. And not only was my husband in Afghanistan, which we knew that part, what we didn't expect was that there would be a hurricane the same day that the baby came. Wow. And I ended up, in the hospital by myself because my whole support system was either evacuating town or, lost power and things kind of fell apart. So it just feels like that's such a symbol for military life, that sometimes you plan for these big challenges and you tell yourself, I know it's going to be difficult to do X, Y, and Z, or to go to this assignment, but we're going to get through it. It's going to be okay. And then just out of left field, the military throws you some completely unexpected challenge that you weren't prepared for. And it just feels like, constantly pivoting and adjusting and being flexible and sacrificing ultimately.
Definitely a lot of sacrifices there. What's kind of 20 years? You guys are kind of over the hump essentially, right? Like, any plans of maybe retirement soon, or?
Yeah, he was supposed to retire next month. That was the
Oh,
original plan. That would have been, the full 20 year.
right,
And we weren't even initially supposed to make it this far. I mean, when he initially joined, it was for the 8-year contract. And I mentioned that we had dated for 7 years. So by the time that we got married, there was only supposed to be 1 year left on his contract. I was not fully committing to being a military spouse. I thought that I was coming in at the very tail end of it, and that we would leave before we had children, and that, our kids would never know this lifestyle. And that was right in 2008, when there was a massive recession and a lot of financial issues. So right around the time that he's trying to transition out of the military and look for new jobs is when everything in the country froze and people stopped hiring. And weighed with
right,
that, we're trying to buy a house and make all these big life choices. And we realized that the military offered a certain level of stability and financial security for our family that gave me the ability to stay home with kids and things like that. So at that time in 2008, we did choose to make it a career, which would have ended this year. But he ended
right.
up getting selected for promotion about a year ago. And that came with some strings attached, which meant, one more duty station, couple more years added to the contract. So hopefully it's about 2 more years till retirement, but I'm kind of in a hold my breath and believe it when I see it kind of thing.
Just when you're trying to get out, they pull you back in, right?
Exactly.
Well, congrats to you both for the promotion there.
Well, thanks.
Lizann, what's 20 years? What's been kind of like the biggest takeaway you've had since being a military spouse?
I think one of the messages that I return to again and again in my book is that the military spouse community might not be with you physically in person. People definitely feel isolated and they feel alone at times. But what I wanted people to understand from reading these letters in the book is that as a community, we really are there to support each other. And military spouses should never be facing these challenges alone. Somebody somewhere has probably gone through a very similar challenge and has figured out a way around it, or a resource that will get you through it, or someone to lean on. And if you can just take inspiration and hope from some of those other spouses that have gone before us, then it really can help you tackle a wider variety of challenges in military life.
Yeah, because I mean, like, the community itself, right? Like, there's been people who've been, from 4 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. There's
Mm-hmm.
just like with the military member, there's different experiences with the military spouses that can, whatever you might be going through, someone else has also been in some sort of similar situation, right?
Exactly. And sometimes it feels like starting over from scratch. Every duty station is different. Every deployment is a little bit different because maybe your kids are different ages, or maybe you have kids and you didn't have them during the previous deployment, or your
Right.
job is different. So there's always kind of an adjustment in how you're handling military life. And it just seems that the more that you can talk to others and bounce ideas off of them, and really just kind of get an idea of what type of emotions are okay, and what's normal, and how is it acceptable to respond to some of these challenges. Because I think that too often we kind of just give the message to younger spouses that, you just need to adjust and deal with it, and this is what you signed up for, which of course no one likes that phrase. um, but the idea that, well, this is how it is, just handle it and deal with it and figure it out on your own. And I think that's a terrible message to
Right.
send to families and to spouses, that really we should be telling them, this is a difficult life, and these sacrifices are challenging, and it's okay to be frustrated or upset or angry or bitter or whatever you're feeling right now is a totally normal response. But I always focus on a message of hope and encouragement that no matter how negative those emotions are, there's always a way through them. There's a next step that you can take forward. There's something that you can do to improve your current situation.
Yeah, definitely. How did you find your career during the 20 years that you guys have had, the deployments that you guys have had? How did you find this career as far as like being a writer?
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure, and it's not something that I originally expected when I first met him and then when we got married. And I think in some ways my story is pretty common to the military spouse community, that you get married and you leave sometimes a very good job and a very good position to move to where your service member is stationed. That's what I did. And then had a baby, was able to continue working until he got PCS orders. And at the next assignment, it was a very remote location and there weren't many jobs in town. So we made the decision that I would stay home with the baby at that duty station. I could continue my education online. I earned my master's. And we thought for sure the next place, the next time, that's when I'm going to get a really good job. And his next assignment was overseas. So when you're stationed overseas, we were in Spain, but every
Okay.
country has their own set of laws and the rules that Americans have to follow. And usually it's very restrictive for Americans to get jobs, because if you take a job in that country, you're essentially taking it from the local economy and you're stealing jobs from the locals. So there's very restrictive rules, no matter what your qualifications are. Even if you speak the local language, it's difficult to find a full-time job overseas. And so that was my story. I ended up being essentially unemployed for about 6 years, which was 2 duty stations. And when we finally got to his 4th assignment, that's when everything kind of fell into place. And I realized this is going to become a permanent situation if I don't do something different. And at the time, I had 4 kids by then. We were in Southern California, which has a very high cost of living. So childcare was an unlikely option. And I needed something flexible that I could do from home. I knew he had deployments coming up that I'd have to juggle and work around. So writing is something that I had done in college. I was an English major in college, and it was a skill that it was natural for me to turn to during that time. And I quickly realized that I could establish a blog and set it up professionally and apply for freelance writing positions and build myself up from scratch as a freelance writer.
Want to support an active duty owned brand? Head over to fortis-fidelis.com. Again, that's fortis-fidelis.com, and help us in honoring the brave and faithful service of our nation's defenders. All proceeds will help us create and provide memorial coins to the families of our fallen service members. Again, that's fortis-fidelis.com, and help Fortis et Fidelis in honoring the brave and faithful.
So that's where the idea of the seasoned spouse came about.
Yes.
Where did that name come from, and how did that all begin? As far as, because I think you mentioned you were in Spain, right? If I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also wrote a book as well, or a guide through Spain.
Yes, I kind of did things a little bit backward. I wrote my first book before I had a blog.
Okay.
Because I wasn't intending to have a career as a writer. It was when we moved overseas, I mentioned that I was unemployed and I was using some of my free time to just write some informative Facebook posts, really, for people that were moving to the area. And some of that I turned into a casual personal blog of our travels and, just something for friends and family to read, to keep up with us. Nothing that I was doing professionally or trying to sell. But what happened was all of these younger spouses and families started turning to me as a resource and saying, oh, we noticed that you've done all these trips. You understand the local culture. You understand how things work around here. Where do I go for this? Or how do I go about finding this locally? And I liked answering their questions and helping them out. And the more that I talked to people, I realized we were all having a difficult time PCSing there. There was not enough of a support system. And people kept saying, there should really be a book about moving to this duty station in Spain. And there was no book. So I decided that I should write one. And that was my first book, Welcome to Rhoda. And it wasn't until a year after that, when we were stationed in California, that I mentioned I was trying to find something to do from home and decided to start a professional blog and try freelance writing. And that's when I chose The Seasoned Spouse as the title of my blog. And it's a title that is used for more experienced military spouses who have been kind of seasoned by military life,
Right.
good or bad experiences. And at the time, we had been married about 10 years, and I wasn't even sure if I had earned that title of seasoned spouse. I felt like it was something I could grow into with my blog, but it was because people were coming to me and asking questions about PCSing or living overseas or going through deployments. For us, it was my husband's 6th deployment, and there were other people in his unit that were preparing for their first. So once they heard that our family had been through so many, they were asking me, well, what are your resources? What paperwork do I need? What should I prepare first? And for me, this was his first non-combat deployment. So I was like, this is going to be easy. It's going to be wonderful. and these other families are like, I don't know what to do. So I just started kind of gathering resources, finding supportive advice, offering words of encouragement. And that's really where my passion for supporting our community came from, is from the Seasoned Spouse blog and going through that 6th deployment with 4 kids and just trying to support initially the spouses in my unit. And then once you create a blog, it's a national resource. And now that it has turned into a book, I'm really excited to share my open when letters with the world.
Yeah, I think you've more than earned that title of the seasoned spouse.
I'm a lot more comfortable with it now.
Yeah, with all the experiences, all the deployments you guys have gone through, I think it fits. That name fits.
Thank you.
So yeah, let's go into the book. Your latest book, Open When: Letters of Encouragement for Military Spouses.
Yeah.
How did you? When did this start? And can you just tell us like your inspiration for writing this book?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are familiar with the concept of the open when letters. Maybe you've received some yourself. It's a tradition that a lot of spouses will do right before deployment. You prepare a stack of letters to open when it's your birthday, open when we're celebrating the holidays apart. It can be a long distance relationship thing, a training, deployment, any of those scenarios. And it's common for service members to get these letters to offer them those words of encouragement when they need to hear them most and when they're, feeling really low and really homesick. And I realized that as beautiful as that tradition is, there's no one writing letters for the spouses. And where do the spouses turn to when they need those supportive words of encouragement, when they need, the right friend at the right time to just help them through a situation? And I wanted to focus not only on the huge challenges like PCSing and like deployment, which I definitely discuss in the book, but I also wanted to talk about those smaller moments that I think many military spouses share, but we just don't even bother talking about them, like open when you've missed a phone call during deployment, or open when you're preparing for your first military ball, or open when you have to move to a duty station that you don't like. So there's just a supportive letter. There's these short, sweet little letters that each one's a couple pages long. And it's something that you can keep on your bookshelf and just open at various times. I hope throughout the entire military spouse journey. It begins at basic training and goes all the way up to retirement. And I just wanted to have a supportive message that our community could open when they needed it most.
That's awesome. And this is this book out now, or where can our audience, where can they go find it?
Yes, it just released last month, September 21st. The publisher is Alvareza Publishing Company, so you can definitely order through their site, especially if you're trying to do any type of bulk order for a book club or a chaplain's office or something like that. But it's also available on Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, pretty much anywhere that books are sold online.
Awesome. So guys and gals, make sure you guys go check that out. Open When Letters of Encouragement for Military Spouses. So, Lizann, I want to go back as far as you being a seasoned spouse, right? You've been 20 years, like we mentioned before, so many different deployments. What's been kind of like the worst experiences you've had as a military spouse?
Well, there are two very dramatic situations that I talk about in the book at different points. The book of letters is broken up into 5 different sections for different sections of military life. And I have a personal story at the beginning of each section, and then the rest of the letters are written to the reader. And so the personal story that I share in the ups and downs of military life, called Handle with Care, that letter is about the phone call I received when my fiance at the time, now my husband, was wounded in Iraq when an IED went off underneath of his foot. Actually, he was standing on top of a pile of rubble and the IED was in the rubble.
Oh, wow.
And it went through his foot, and of course he was injured. And I ended up receiving a post-it note from my college roommate that just said, he called, he's injured, and he'll call back. And I was alone when I received that note. This was kind of in the days before cell phones, so I was kicking myself for not buying one at the time. But just kind of pacing back and forth in that dorm room and crying, and every possible scenario is going through my head. I didn't know how he was injured or in what way or how severely. I'm picturing that he's lost limbs, or that
Right.
and I should have been a little bit comforted by the fact that he was well enough to make a phone call. So there's certainly some comfort in knowing that he was alive, but just facing that uncertainty and that fear alone was a very traumatizing experience. And obviously it was physically traumatizing for him as well. But when he did call, I learned that he was in a hospital in Germany. He had been, injured so that he couldn't walk temporarily, but that he was expected to recover. He had some surgeries and he was able to eventually walk and run again. He's still active duty and still doing his mandatory PT. So he's made a full recovery, and that part is very good news. But I don't think I'll ever forget the fear and the pain and the anxiety of that moment. And because I was a fiance at the time, I wasn't very connected to his military unit. He was stationed on the other side of the country. I hadn't really met any other families. We were both pretty young still at the time, so he didn't know a whole lot of people that were married. And now I know about things like the Family Readiness Center and, an FRG or a spouse group. At the time, I didn't know that those resources existed. So I had no connection to his chain of command. I didn't know who to talk to in his unit. And I was just alone in college receiving this horrible news and trying to figure out how it would change our lives. And so I think that has always kind of made a very special place in my heart for supporting other military girlfriends and boyfriends and fiancés, and just wanting to be there for them no matter what stage of this journey they're on. I think that we all share so many similar emotions. It doesn't matter if you've actually gotten married yet or not. You're still going to be missing your service member. You're still going to be worried about them. You're still going to have questions about military life. And all of that is something that we can share and support each other to go through together.
Definitely. And, all through that, I think you also mentioned your second life-changing event, right?
Yes, the other one I referred to briefly earlier, and that was giving birth in the hospital during the hurricane, which was years later, but this was baby number 3. And again, I think it was just the experience of being so alone in that moment. In particular, the birth itself was okay. Most things went fine medically, but the hospital actually lost power due to the hurricane.
Oh, wow.
So after the birth, I was sent down to the recovery floor. The birthing floor had power and everything, but the recovery floor did not. So they pretty much gave me a flashlight to find my way around this room with my newborn baby. And then they came in a few hours later when I was trying to rest and said, everyone has to go out into the hallway because there's a tornado warning. And so I bring my newborn baby out into the hallway, and we're all kind of sheltering in place in the dark with these flashlights. And as I looked around, every other person had, their spouse or a parent or somebody with them. And I was the only one that was alone with my baby, just sitting in this dark hallway. And again, that's a moment that just sticks with you. It was not as traumatizing, of course, as hearing about my husband's injury, but it was a moment of stress and anxiety and uncertainty, and really just feeling so separated from him. I knew that he was on the other side of the world, and he had already checked in with me by sat phone during the birth, and so I didn't have a connection to him at that moment. I wasn't able to just, send a text message and get a hold of him and let him know what was happening. So feeling so disconnected and alone, again, is something that I think I've become very passionate about. And I want military spouses to feel connected. I want them to build their own support networks virtually, in person, online, whatever you can do, because I just don't want other people to go through that feeling of being alone. I want them to feel like there's always someone that they can turn to that would support them if they're feeling like they're in a dark moment, alone in a hallway by themselves.
Do you feel, you mentioned these two traumatic events, right? Do you feel like it's made you a stronger person, one, and two, it's helped you to, help other military spouses who might have gone through those situations?
Absolutely. Yes, to both questions there. I think, yes, for sure, going through difficult scenarios, it forces you to be stronger, whether you like it or not.
Right.
The first situation, when I received news of my fiance's injury, yeah, you come face to face with that horrible reality of military life, that you could lose your loved one at any time. And I think we all know that somewhere in the back of our mind. And you talk about wills, and you talk about these life or death, insurance and life support type of questions, but we don't really come face to face with it too often. And when you do, it's intimidating, and it's horrifying, and it's scary. But I do think that once you've faced that fear, that in some ways it makes you stronger, and you get a little bit of control over it, and it's no longer as terrifying and intimidating, because I've been there. I've been to that place. And obviously it would be horrible if I lost him. And of course, there's nothing about that scenario that is appealing to me. But I do think that it makes you, on the inside, it makes your personality stronger and better able to face other challenges when you've dealt psychologically with a certain type of challenge in your life. And the same thing with the birth. I think that did traumatize me for a certain time. For a while, it was difficult to talk about it. And I wasn't entirely comfortable sharing the story. And even when I was writing the book, I was shaking, and I was crying a little bit writing that story down again, and reliving that experience, even though my son just turned 10 years old. So it's not a fresh story, but putting yourself back in that place emotionally, it makes you live through it all again. And I think that there is certainly a consolation knowing that if my story can help inspire another pregnant military spouse who's looking at deployment and thinking, how in the world am I going to get through this? How am I going to have my baby alone? What am I going to do? I hope that my story will bring some encouragement and some inspiration, and let her know that, yeah, even if it's really, really difficult, and even if nothing goes the way that you planned, you do have that strength to get through it. You can find a way to do this, and it's going to be okay, ultimately. I think many of us going through traumatic situations, if you know that you can help one other person and make their life and their journey just a little bit easier, then in a way that makes all of that difficulty and all of that trauma worthwhile.
Yeah, most definitely. I appreciate you for sharing that, Lizann. Talked about those difficult moments, but since you've started, writing and blogging,
Mm-hmm.
having these books, how many books in total have you written?
This is actually my third. I
Okay.
mentioned the guidebook about our base in Spain, which is called Welcome to Rota. I did write a short deployment booklet, which is called the Ultimate Deployment Guide. And that's more of a checklist and, paperwork preparation and things to do during deployment. But both of those are available on my website. And now the Open When book is my third, and that's the first to be traditionally published.
Awesome. Um, what's kind of what's been the most rewarding experiences you've had so far since you started this whole journey?
I think it's always rewarding when you find out ways that you've touched other people's lives and inspired them. The beauty of writing is that you put your words out there for the world. You share your story, and you're never quite sure who's going to read it or when they're going to read it. I've had feedback on things that I wrote years ago that people are stumbling upon for the first time, and they're like, "Thank you for writing this." And I have to kind of jog my memory and be like, "What did I say again?" So it's always kind of rewarding and refreshing and exciting to hear those types of stories. I do have one fun story to share from our time overseas. When I published my first book, the local Spanish community was thrilled because I was talking about where to find things on the local economy, shopping and where to eat at local restaurants and how to travel around town. So this was a great thing for the local tourism office because I was promoting local businesses and encouraging Americans to get off base and explore and spend their money at local establishments.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Spanish government actually made a big deal of it. They wrote a newspaper article about me, and they invited me to present my book to the mayor, which would be at the town hall. Well, it happens that their town hall is a 13th century castle.
That's awesome.
So here I am, this military spouse that never expected to live overseas, never expected to write a book about it, and I'm presenting my book in this castle that Columbus once visited. And it was just a very surreal experience. But again, I think it's a beautiful symbol of military life that you never quite know where this journey is going to take you, and you don't know what adventures are around the corner. So I'm a big believer that if you continue to just use your skills and follow your dreams and do what you're most passionate about, that there's always going to be something wonderful that makes it all worthwhile.
Definitely, that's awesome having having that in a castle
Yeah, it
to
was a
get
good book launch.
recognition.
It's a
Yeah,
hard one to top.
that's awesome. So Lizann, before we go to our second segment here, we have again veterans, military members, and obviously military spouses that are listening.
Mhm.
What's one thing you want our listeners to take away from this episode?
Well, first of all, I hope that people know that my book is available as a source of encouragement and inspiration through all the stages of military life. So it's a great gift for any military spouse. But I also hope to inspire some other writers out there. I think that, veterans, spouses, there are so many talented people in our community. And a lot of times people put their talents on the back burner and they say, oh, I'll get to that maybe after retirement, maybe at the next duty station, after the next kid, whatever your excuse might be. And I just encourage you to stick with those skills and to try and use them because, like I said, you never know what beautiful adventures are ahead. And maybe the world is waiting for you to share your stories and share your words. And we can't do that until you put them to paper.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier, right? Like you just never know how much of an impact your story or your writing, your book that you wrote years ago. You never know how much of an impact that had made on somebody until you,
Yeah.
you
And I
hear it,
think
right?
there's a lot of people out there that just think, if I could just make one person's life better or easier, then this will all be worth it. Well, if you're writing, I mean, you have the potential to touch hundreds and even thousands of lives,
Right.
especially over the course of years. The small guidebook that I wrote about our Spanish duty station, I never expected it to be a bestseller or anything because it's only about one very specific and very small military base in Spain, but it continues to sell copies every month, and every copy I know is a family that's PCSing to that duty station. And I just am excited to see that hopefully some of their questions will be answered and their journey will be a little bit smoother, and they'll have the courage to get off base and to explore. And I'm excited that my book is part of that.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Just having that impact on anybody, right?
Yeah, so I can't wait to see the impact of the Open When book, just being launched on a national level. And it's something that was written specifically to appeal to the entire military spouse community. I mean, there's a letter in there for everyone. And I can't wait to hear the stories of whose lives are changed and who's been impacted by it. But I hope it's going to be a very, very positive influence.
Awesome, Lizann. So, going into our second segment of the podcast here, this is what I call the Fast Five, the same 5 questions I ask all my guests. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
All right, so first question. What's one hobby you enjoy?
Besides writing, I love baking.
Anything in particular in baking?
I made pumpkin bread this week. So anything that the kids are pretty, they'll eat almost anything. So cookies, muffins, that's just kind of my fun therapeutic hobby.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of mouths to feed though.
Yeah.
Second question. If you had to choose one person to hang out with for one day, who would it be and why?
It might sound cliche, but I would have to say Mother Teresa. That she's always been an inspiring person to me, and not someone that I think I can imitate exactly, but I think there's such beauty in her life that if I can even imitate a part of that, then that would be amazing and incredible.
Okay, next question. Besides your own book, recommend a book for our audience to read.
Oh, that's a good one. I would go with the 5 Love Languages. It can be the military edition or any edition because it's out in a bunch of different versions. But that book was very helpful to me when my husband was deployed, and we kind of had to work through some relationship issues and get on the same page. It kind of explained a lot of things and made a lot of sense in our marriage.
I didn't know there was a military edition to that.
Yes, it's the original author, and then Jocelyn Green, I want to say, is the military spouse advisor. So she's like a co-author on that one.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of the military version. I have to check that out.
It's on Amazon.
Awesome. So next question. What's your favorite quote and why?
So the motto of my blog is "We are all in this together." And to be fair, I was saying that long before the pandemic. I think that people are getting a little worn out with the phrase now, so I might need to refresh my motto. But I do truly believe that that's true in military life and just, in friendship in general, that we're really all part of the same journey, and some people are further ahead and some people are further behind. But if we could just help each other along that road, it would be such a better journey for everyone.
I mean, it's a great motto. I think it definitely speaks volumes as far as the community. Just making sure that we're all, like you said, we're all in this together, no matter what stage of, military career you're in.
Yeah.
All right. So, Lizann, last question. Where do you see yourself in a year, 5 years, or even 10 years from now?
Now that one's tricky. So a year, I can safely say we will still be in Gulfport, Mississippi, because that's where he's stationed right now. Okay. And he's still planning to be active duty then. 5 years from now, we should be retiring to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which we already have a house there that we have renters living in right now. We can't wait to move up to it. So we're excited about being in that area. 10 years, honestly, I have no idea. I will have children graduated college at that point. So that seems like a whole other life to me. And maybe we'll still be in that house in Gettysburg. I hope to still be writing. I hope that I've produced other books by then. I think that's a passion that'll stay with me for a long time.
Awesome. And Lizann, thank you so much for for taking the time here and sharing your story as a military spouse, your journey, all the obstacles that you had to overcome. And like you said, right, as with your writing, as long as we've touched somebody, that one person, changed someone's life for the better, I think it's all worth it. And before we go, can you just mention to us again, where can people find your book, your latest book, and also where can they follow you and support you?
Yeah, thank you. The book again is called Open When: Letters of Encouragement for Military Spouses. You can find it on Amazon or anywhere that books are sold online. And you can also get it directly through my publisher, which is militaryfamilybooks.com. And you can follow me on my blog, which is seasonspouse.com. And I'm on most social media as either Seasoned Spouse or The Seasoned Spouse.
Awesome. Lizann, again, thank you for your time and sharing your story, and can't wait for the book to it is out. Hopefully, we can provide one for our audience here as well, in sharing your story.
That would be lovely.
Awesome, Lizann. Well, thank you again, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Hey everyone, Raiden here. I just want to thank you for listening to our podcast. And make sure you guys go check out our website, fortis-fidelis.com. Again, that's fortis-fidelis.com, and learn how you can help us support in providing these memorial coins to the families of the fallen. And make sure you guys go follow our social media on Facebook, FRTS FDLS. Again, that's FRTS FDLS. And on Instagram and Twitter at FRTS_FDLS. Again, that's FRTS_FDLS. And make sure you guys go subscribe, review, and leave a comment on our podcast on all the podcast platforms. Till then, take care.